Okay, part two. Yeah, yeah. The Persians came and they were in Athens and they burnt Athens to the ground before running off to look for the army. And yeah, but anyways, those were those wars. And then Athens got their asses kicked by the Spartans. I don't have the timeline clear on all this, but that was in the golden age of Greece, the golden age of Athens. And I think that's where Hippocrates and Sophocles and all those guys lived, and Socrates. And Socrates was the big philosopher. When I grew up, I always saw Socrates as being like the biggest one because he was the first one. He was basically he didn't write any books. I don't think he really had any like specific teachings. He was an ex-soldier in the army from like middle to low class roots, the son of like a laborer or something. He wasn't like an aristocratic dude, and by now he was a really old guy, and he was really ugly dude. They even have a statue of him. He was like bald and had an oversized forehead and wrinkles everywhere, and nose was turned up, and was just an ugly dude. And he was basically like hanging out around the Agora in Athens, which is this like the marketplace where all the people hang out, right at the northern end of the Acropolis, which is this big hill, that the Parthenon is on top of. He'd hang out there all the time, all day long, educating all of the youth around there, all the kids. I guess started his own like outdoor school, and I think he was kind of like a reformer, basically, if you want to look at him as a religion reformer, because this was about 500 BC, more or less about the time that the Buddha and Confucius and Lao Tzu lived. And the Buddha was a reformer as well. By then, you have these, you have like the way that religion, I'm going to have this on another video, so I'm going to just be really brief about it, but with religion in those days, you'd have all these different kind of superstitious rites and rituals that they do. Like if you, and stuff for the gods too, like if you can't find your keys, pray to this god. And if you're sick, then sing this song to the other god over and over again. So they had all these gods, and that's how Hinduism was. They had all these gods, all these different things. So all these people basically started relying on that, and it didn't do anybody any good because they could think they could just be the biggest asshole ever, and just this fat, lazy, gluttonous abuser. But they thought they were the best at than everybody else, and with the best karma and more worthy because they knew the most amount of like chants, and they knew the most amount of gods. It's like, you're not as cool as me. How many gods can you name? How many songs to gods can you do? You don't have the powers. I could curse you with a special song I know. Just like superstition running way out of control, and that's what the Buddha was. But it was basically chill out, dudes. You don't need any of that. Just meditate. And that was kind of like what Socrates was all about. Socrates, by then, they had all their gods. They had temples to all the different gods everywhere. They held all these offerings, and offerings is another thing that's not good for society because they do sacrifices and offerings, and then they wouldn't have any meat left over for the people because they gave it all to the gods. And they would waste all their time spending all day long when they could be out in the fields, toiling the fields, or doing stuff that was worthwhile, but they'd be out there twiddling their thumbs in the temple all day long, giving stuff to imaginary people, and it was just like, it became out of control. So that's basically what Socrates was. He would just be sitting there like asking them questions based on common sense. He'd be like, what what is good and what is bad? And he'd be like, the kid would be like, well, walking around naked is bad because Diana says that it's bad. And then he'd be like, okay, well, what does Zeus say that walking around naked is bad? Yes. Is good? Yes. Well, then who's right? So then there are things according to the, if what is good and what is bad is what the gods say, but the gods have different ideas on what is good and what is bad, then things can be both good and bad. So there is nothing that is either. So you didn't answer my question. Oh my God, I guess I didn't. You see, there has to be something that is good, that is universally good, and that is universally bad. And just like kind of conversations probably that you and I would like scoff at, but those people that were just really superstitious and couldn't think for themselves. So she was teaching all these dudes to think for themselves, and the older people didn't like that because their society, I guess, was just based off of all these societal rules. They had slavery by then, and maybe he was talking poorly about slavery, and they had people who were working the fields off there like 100 miles away, and your landlord lived in like Athens, and so that the landlord who lived in Athens had like knights and police force out there to make sure that those people paid their taxes, or else they'd get killed, and like was suppressive. So maybe Socrates started talking about that kind of stuff, that against suppression, and the adults didn't like that, and so they accused him of corrupting the youth, and so they took him to trial, and they said, what are you doing corrupting the youth? And he's like, I'm not corrupting the youth. I'm just asking them questions. And so that's why it's called Socratic questioning. He invented Socratic questioning, where it's basically, you teach people just by asking them questions, because you teach the kind of people who don't think, never seriously thought about stuff. So you just ask them simple questions and have them answer it, and then they figure it out themselves. They go, oh yeah, I guess I can't answer that question, I guess. And it's a really cool way to do things. But yeah, they didn't like that, so they were going to charge him for corrupting the youth, and so they voted whether or not to I guess have him like thrown in jail or like ostracized, and a certain number of people ostracized him, and then they asked him what he thought his punishment should be, and he said, give me free meals for life. And that's what Olympic champions got. An Olympic gold medalist got free meals for life, and so that pissed him off, and so then they took another vote, and now more people voted now to have him executed. They were like, maybe we should just execute him. So more people voted to execute him than to have him punished. And so yeah, they executed him with hemlock. They had him drink hemlock, which is this little flower that grows everywhere. At least I know it's in Colorado. But it was he drank a bunch of it, and it basically like turns it melts his like organs, and then makes all of his limbs go numb, and then like stops his heart, stops him from breathing, and he dies. It's like a really painful way to die. But I think he was with Plato when he died. Plato watched him die, and he was like 70 though. But yeah, Plato was his student, and Plato was a big philosopher after that, because Plato wrote books that actually survived. So I guess we were in a time where after that they took their culture seriously enough to actually hold on to their books or protect them. And he wrote a book called The Republic, which was basically saying that people should do jobs that they're good at. Because back in those days, the political system of Athens was people could have like lots of different offices at the same time. And they had democracy. They voted people in. Like, they would have these little like chips, and you would hold the chip down, and you'd either have like the chip for this dude or the chip for the other dude that you would scribble in their name. And then you'd throw it in, and whoever got the most chips won. And it was a great form of democracy there in Athens. Like, people, any citizen could be king, anybody. You could only be a citizen if both of your parents were born in Athens, and you had to be, and you couldn't be like a slave or anything. But out of those dudes, anybody could be anything. But you could hold all the different offices at the same time. You could be president of Athens, the king of the bank, the leader of the army, everything at the same time. And maybe some of the different people were doing this, and it was just turned into this like money thing, You'd buy your power or whatever. And so he wrote a book saying that people are good at stuff that they do. So somebody who is a silversmith should just be a silversmith, because they're good at it, and they're the best at it, so they do it. Somebody who is a politician, they should just be a politician, and they should just stick to that and do that, because you get better at stuff that you practice. And that's kind of like not, it makes sense that people are good at stuff that they do, but it's also not a good idea, because it's kind of like the beginning of the idea of classism. Like, well then you just have somebody's born in a family of silversmiths, just make them be a silversmith, and they can't work out of being a silversmith. They're going to be a silversmith forever, But that's not how I would take what he said. I think what he said is, if he had a parents of silversmith, well, he could become a politician, if that's what he is, and that's what he practices at. But anyways, the Nazis and a lot of like totalitarian type of people used Plato as like, referenced him and was justifying their power. I am the leader and I make the decisions, and because those people, they're just workers. But anyways, he wrote the Republic, and he wrote some other books. I don't remember exactly what he wrote. I know he wrote the Timaeus and Critias, which were ancient stories of the good old days, because Plato had a grandfather who had been to Alexandria, Greece, which I think, or somewhere in Greece, maybe it was Giza, but he had read some books and talked to priests and stuff in Greece, and his grandfather told him, his grandfather's name was Critias, who had a grandfather named Critias, who was retelling the story of Atlantis, and that's where we get our tales of Atlantis. It's from Plato. And this, according to Plato, and you can read the book, Atlantis was some warlord, dangerous country beyond the Straits of Gibraltar, so beyond they called it the Pillars of Hercules, and they were like trying to take over the whole world, and so they had a battle with Athens, and Athens won that battle, and then they had a big flood, and they lost their civilization, and Plato said in his book that was 9,000 years before him. So we're talking 11,000 years ago. And the interesting thing about that, I won't get into it too much, but it's really interesting because 11,000 years ago is when the end of the Ice Age happened. And there was a growth of sea level. The sea level went up. So, that was all over. The great story of the flood, obviously it was from Greece because Timaeus was there. It's a story from the Middle East, from the Jews, and from the Athenians. So, and lots of pretty much every other society in the whole world, like the Hopis, had tales of the Great Flood. So, yeah, pretty interesting. Anyways, That was Plato. And Athens. They also had a really Athens. Well, actually, all of Greece had a really, really, really strong theater society. And I think the father of the theater was Sophocles. I know there were 4 really good playwrights. And they, every single city-state would make a huge amphitheater that was on the side of a mountain. It was in a circle, and then they'd have the stage in the front with the big like building in the back and the orchestra in the bottom. You know, kind of like what we have now. We learned that from the Greeks. We got that from the Greeks. The interesting thing about Greece is like so much of our society comes right from the Greeks. You know, the theater comes from the Greeks. The Christian religion, which I'll get into later, comes from the Greeks. Our science, all the way up until the scientific revolution, all of our greatest scientists were from the Greeks. They looked at that as like the great golden age where everything, where those people were the smartest, and we follow what they do. And but yeah, they had their. I went to Sparta. I saw a big one there, a big theater there. Athens. Yeah, they were all over the place. And they had comedies, like really like kind of gross out comedies, having to do with like, you know, scatological, like farting and stuff, and it's really, really like sexually promiscuous type of stuff. They did a lot of stuff in the nude in those days. I know the women in Athens shaved their pussies. I don't know if they were naked too, but men wrestled in the nude in the Olympics and practicing for the Olympics, oiled up. The women participated in the Olympics too. Maybe I should talk about the Olympics some. The Olympics started in like 790 from Olympia, and went all the way until like 350 when the Romans, or the Christian Romans, shut it down because they thought it was too barbaric. It wasn't Christian enough. But they had like kind of like lesser kind of Olympiads since like the 1300s, since like Mycenae, a long time ago. It was a way for all those different groups to get together, and I'm sure that was with the gods' ideas. Because that's what I'd say to local people. I'd be like, look, you guys should get together and have competitions, find out who's the best boxer and stuff. But they had the most important Olympic sport was the chariot race, where they would, I think it was 2 horses pulling, or maybe 2 to 4 horses pulling one dude on a 2-wheeled chariot around the big hippodrome, that big oval thing. And that was the biggie. That's what the rich people did though, because they were the ones with the money for the nice horses and chariots and stuff. But they also had boxing. They had wrestling. And boxing was pretty savage. Like, they would just punch each other. It wasn't boxing the way we do, where you just keep on punching each other. It was one dude punches the other dude, and the other dude lets him punch him. So then the other dude punches him, and the other guy has to let him, and they just take turns. And the first dude to fall down loses. Yeah. But I think they had, like, ultimate fighting, too. One dude was in a fight in the Olympics, and, like, maybe they were fighting with weapons or something, but his organs came out. His intestines came out. And I think he won that battle. He killed the dude in the last minute, but then he died. So they were like badasses. And then they had, what else did they have? I think didn't they have like pole vaulting? And they had sprinting for sure across the thing. It was like 100 meters. Yeah, they didn't have that many things though. But they had it every 4 years. That's why we have ours every 4 years. And they'd have dudes come from all around, and they'd be there for like 9 months. They would be at Olympia together for 9 months training with each other before the Olympics started. They wouldn't all show up like 2 days beforehand and do it like in modern days. They'd be there for 9 months. And I think they'd train for like a whole year solid before they happened, which makes sense because that's about how long it takes to get in really good shape. So yeah, they'd all be there together and oil each other up butt naked and wrestle each other, and they'd have their trainers and all that stuff. And then the people would come around from all around and watch, and the dude who won got free meals for life and got to be like, venerated. There was one dude who was an Olympic champion, and both of his sons were Olympic gold medalists. So like I guess in one Olympiad, like his son won, and then they raised him up on his shoulders, and he was like, "Yay, my son's won," and then he like died that night. But Olympia wasn't the only place that they had those games. They also had the Delphian games at Delphi, where the Oracle was. And that was a way amazing setting. Oh my God. If you ever go to Greece, you should go to Delphi. And I have YouTube videos of it. You might want to check it out. Because it's like, it's not so far from the sea. But once you get to the sea, you have to go way, way, way up, steep mountain, and then it's up on the side. Way up on the side of a really steep mountain, man, with like big cliffs above you. And so the entire city is like zigzag up the side of a steep ass mountain, and on the very top of it is where their big hippodrome thing is, and right below that is where their big theater is, and it would have been just amazing. But that was kind of like the Washington D.C. What Washington D.C. is to America, like that's what. Or maybe not quite, because I guess whatever sort of, it was like the center of the Greek world. Whatever city-state was on charge, that was the capital of the city-state. So, it was like the Athenians were boss dogs at one point, then it was the Spartans, and then it was the Thebes. But throughout the entire time, for like 1,300 years or something crazy, or 1,600 if you want to start, well, I don't know how many long time, that was basically the Switzerland. It was like the neutral zone of the Greeks, where all the Greeks would go and basically pay homage to, and maybe even give taxes to, just out of goodness of their heart, because it was just the center of their culture. They had lots of temples to like lots of different gods, not just one god, but they had an oracle there who was some like crazy lady who like I guess sat in some Steve that had some cave that had some certain kind of vapor coming out of it that put her into a trance, and she would like talk nonsense through some hole, and then some other priest dude would like decipher what she said and then give people their predictions, their answers to their questions. For example, when the Persians came to attack Greece, I think it was Pericles went there and was like, yeah, what's going to happen about the Persians? Are we going to beat them? And she goes, one empire will fall and another will begin. So he was like, what? So I guess that was right. The Persian Empire fell and the Athenian Empire began or something. And then there was another story concerning her. It was Oedipus Rex. I think Sophocles wrote it. And I don't know if it was his tale from a real tale or it was just a made-up tale. It's probably just a made-up story, but it was about some king who was given to the wolves when he was a little baby because the oracle at Delphi told him that his son was going to murder him and have sex with his wife, with his mother. And with the king's mother and the baby's wife. So he had a son, so he let the son to die up on the side of the hill. But only problem is, he told the servants to kill the son up on the side of the hill. So the servants went up there, but they didn't want to kill him. They got queasy. So they just left the baby to die, but then somebody else picked up the baby and raised the baby. And so then he grew up as Oedipus, and then he met, and then the king later on was on some journey across kingdom or whatever. But he was in disguise because he didn't want people to know he was the king. So, and there were some robbers, and Oedipus happened to be there, and he killed the robbers, and then he thought the king was one of the robbers or something because he was escaping, running away because the king thought that Oedipus was one of the robbers. So Oedipus killed the king, and then. somebody was there and was like, "Oh no, but that was the king." Oh, he's like, "Oh, I didn't know." So then they brought his body back. He's like, "Oh yeah, I killed your king on accident, trying to protect him," and he ended up having an affair with the queen and turned into the king, Oedipus Rex, King Oedipus. But then they went back to the Oracle at Delphi, and the mother was like, "Okay, good. I guess you're wrong about your prophecy because my king was just killed by this guy, and he's not my son." But then she was like, "Oh, but he is your son. They never killed the baby. He's Oedipus." So he was like, "No way, I'm Oedipus. Oh, I'm the one, and that's my mother. Oh no, I had sex with my mother." So he ran off and he like tore his eyes out with his own hands and lived as a blind man the rest of his life. So that's why you have the story Oedipus complex. It's when you're sexually attracted to your mother. I guess Freud was talking about that. I don't see how that would be possible though, unless your mother's like really hot and really young. But anyways, another subject. Maybe I could see being sexually attracted to your daughter. But anyways, yeah. So that was a story revolving the Oracle at Delphi, and I think there was maybe another Oracle somewhere else. And I think they even had another games, Olympic game type thing, someplace else. But yeah, anyways, my God, how did I get stuck on that Olympics tangent? When they did the Olympics again back in 1896, they started them in Athens, but I guess that's in the 1896. Yeah, so Athens, anyways, all those different city-states were top dog at different points. Athens was top dog, and then they got their asses kicked by the Spartans. And then the Spartans took over. Spartans were an interesting city-state because they had their own way to do things. Oh, wait, I'm not done with Athens. Athens, yeah, the politics of Athens. They were the democracy, and I think there were some other city-states there who were democracy too. But yeah, Athens was a democracy. Originally, it was a kingdom. They had their first king, who was king for life, and then another king for life, and then it started to become more democratic, and they started to have the king, and he could only be king for 30 years. Then they had a king, he could only be king for 10 years. So then I guess they choose the other king through democracy. And so they called him Archon, because Arch, I guess in that language, meant 10. So he'd be king for 10 years. And that went on for like 100 years. And then they moved it down to a year. You could be king, you could be boss boy for 1 year. And that must have been after Pericles, though, because Pericles was in charge for a long time. Or maybe he was a tyrant, because the word tyrant comes from Greece, because there was a period of like there were tyrants of different places who abused their power, and maybe that's what motivated them to have the democracy. Yeah, they just had so much communication between them because of the boats going over and being hard workers. I guess they just accelerated their advancement and they became democratic. But yeah, they had the elected archons, and you were the boss guy for 1 year only. And then the other dude for 1 year. I don't remember exactly when that started. But then the Romans took over, and they had archons just like that all the way until the fall of the Roman Empire. The rise of the Eastern Roman Empire. So the Romans let them keep their archon thing. But, Sparta had a different system. They had kings, but they had two kings. They had bi-king system, which isn't totally unique. The Jews back in the day, in the Old Testament days, had their priests who were boss priests, and they had their two priests. You have two boss priests to kind of balance each other's power. It's kind of similar to what we have these days. We have the Democrats and Republicans, the two dudes in charge who kind of check each other, and argue with each other and stuff. Only today we don't have the Democrat and the Republican in charge in office at the same time. You have the two parties in charge at the same time, but not two people. Well, in Sparta, you'd have two kings in charge at the same time, but they were hereditary monarchs. So there was basically two families, two dynasties. There was the Aegeans and the Argoneids or something like that. And one of them was the senior. One of them was traditionally more in charge than the other one. But yeah, that went on for a while. And their social structure, they were a social structure of warriors. That's what they did. They just fought and fought, and they practiced the first known practice of eugenics. I haven't been able to breathe for like a week now, dude. I don't know what the hell's going on. Maybe I'm dying of lung cancer. Freaking ears clogged up. I'm not doing good shape right now. Anyways, yeah, like if they had a baby who was born with like deformities, they would just throw him into the riverbed or something. They'd just leave him to die. So only the strong of the strong could allowed to be to survive. And then they would basically turn them into soldiers. Once the kid would live with his mama, and then once he got to be like 6 or something, they'd move him into boarding school, where it was a state practice, where all the other boys were supposed to beat up on him and abuse him, basically turn him into a badass motherfucker. So that by the time he got into being an old boy, he beat up on the little kids. And yeah, they just fight all the time. And I think they'd even they'd have to go up in the mountains, just like that movie 300. They'd have to do a little stint up in the mountains and be up in the mountains for like 3 weeks, hunting and foraging and surviving all by themselves. And that's how they were supposed to survive, by stealing from other Spartans and other people around there. They were supposed to do that, but they were supposed to do it but not get caught. They were supposed to be stealthy about it, and if they got caught, they'd get punished severely, so like beaten or something. So I guess the people of Sparta were like really good at keeping their stuff hidden and not having much. That's where the word Spartan comes from, when you don't have much. Because like this when they were in boarding school, all they had was a blanket and their sword and their shield and like their sandals and their underwear, and that's all, kind of like in the movie 300 Spartans. So yeah, they were badasses, and they won a lot of wars. They were really, really disciplined and physically strong people. Yeah, and they won a lot of wars. They lost some wars too. I think the way that the Greeks fought was in this formation where you put a lot of Greeks together, packed together in a really tight configuration with really long 20-foot long spears, pikes, pike warriors, and they were called hoplites. And they were about 3 feet apart, as opposed to 5 feet apart with the dudes with the swords. And they'd run at you and poke you, and so people couldn't get close enough to them to fight. But that was mainly also a Macedonian thing. I think the Macedonians perfected that, because the Spartans, I think, may have fought with swords. I don't know. But yeah, the Spartans had slaves that they'd subjugate people around them and then bring their slaves over. And at one point, there were like more slaves in Sparta than Spartans, and the slaves were never allowed to fight. But no slave could ever become a Spartan, so you could only be a Spartan if you were parents of a Spartan. But they could only copulate with each other clandestinely, because the dudes I think they were like separated from the women, so the men had to sneak away from army camp to be with their girlfriends. And of course they were encouraged to do that because they needed to procreate, but they weren't officially allowed to do that, so they had to do it. They had to sneak it. So it was like a country, it was a city-state of like criminals. It was like, we're all going to be criminals. We're all going to be thieves and liars, sneak our sex and all that. But anyways, when they would lose wars and they'd come back, they wouldn't have enough people to repopulate their city, because slaves couldn't be the boss. So I think they had a slave rebellion that was successful and killed the Spartans, and that's one thing that brought the downfall of the Spartans. But another thing was just losing wars because their armies just weren't big enough, and so Sparta fell. But they were they were strong there for a while, and they had some colonies and stuff. Another city-state that was powerful, well, it was the Corinthians, because they were a big trade city, because they were right there in the isthmus, well, the current isthmus of Corinth, which they only created like 100 years ago. So back then, when boats wanted to trade and go over that small land area, boats would land and unload their stuff and then put them on like horseback, haul them across to dump them on another boat on the other side. And so the Corinth became a big, wealthy port town for that, and it was a strategic place for a long time after that. They have like Byzantine era like castles on the top of the hill there and stuff. And then Thebes was a big important place for a time too. They had another system. I don't exactly know what it was, but they beat the Spartans at one point. I rode my bike past Thebes last summer, and I didn't see anything. All I remember was just some tiny little podunk town, and I zoomed through. I didn't see any signs for your museum or go this way to see the ancient Theban ruins. Nothing. It wasn't even a big city. It was some tiny little town. So, anyways, back then it was a biggie. Who else was biggie? There were hundreds of them, man. They were all over. Yeah. So, anyways, that was the 400s in that golden age, and then there was this other dude up in northern Macedon, what they called Macedon. It was modern day around Thessaloniki, which is about 80 miles north of of Mount Olympus. There was Philip of Macedon, and he was the new tyrant. He was the new dude killing everybody, taking over, subjugating all the other dudes, and I guess he had an idea. He wanted to unite Greece to take over the Persians, just like the Persians had taken over the Greeks, tried to take over the Greeks 100 years beforehand. And he was, but he got killed because some assassin killed him at one of his at his birthday party or something like that. And some people think it was because, and it was on his marriage day. And some people think it was because his other wife didn't want his new wife's son to be king. And if he got killed, then the power would go off to his current wife's, or his soon-to-be ex-wife's son. And so, yeah, he got killed, and then the power went off to his son, Alexander the Great. And Alexander the Great, he was like an intense dude. Anyways, like his mother bragged about how she was impregnated by Zeus instead of her husband, Philip of Macedon, and she was a soothsayer. She was like a medicine woman type from like one of the barbarian tribes. So I think so. And when Alexander was a kid, like everybody was afraid of this horse. And it was like a wild stallion, and he came up to it, and he was smart. And he saw that the horse was just afraid of his shadow, so he turned the horse around and then jumped on him. And everybody was like, "Oh my God!" And Philip goes, "Greece is not big enough for you, Alexander. You must take over the whole world one day." So I guess that stuck in his head, and he was big-headed. Some people think he was gay though, because he had, I guess, lots of affection for men or something. But he became king, and then he continued the conquerings. And he got a whole army of Greeks eventually together and attacked the Persians. And they attacked the Persians and kicked the Persians' ass. It's some big battle called Battle of Persepolis or something like that. And Xerxes ran away, the king. I think that's what his name was, or Darius maybe it was his name. I don't remember. But the king ran away, and then he was eventually assassinated by his own generals, probably because they thought he was a girly man for running away or something. But Alexander ran after him because he wanted to kill him himself. And when he found that he had already been killed by the time they found the body, he was pissed off. And I think he went and tracked down the generals and killed them. It was like, you are not worthy to kill him. I wanted to do it. But yeah, then they went over to one of the capitals of their empire, which was Persepolis, and there's this huge place, which is actually a good ruins these days. But they burnt it to the ground, and nobody really knows why. Some people think it was an accident, but when the Persians went to Athens 100 years beforehand, they burnt Athens to the ground. So maybe it was just payback. But then he went over to Babylon, took over Babylon, and then he embarked on this like 11-year campaign of moving north, sieging city by city, city after city, and kicking ass after ass. I don't know if this happened before. I think he sieged Tyre before he destroyed the Persian Empire, but Tyre was one of the cities in the Persian Empire that he sieged, and it was in this island that was like a half-mile out, behind walls. And so what he did was he made a bridge. He created a land bridge across to Tyre just by using the boats and dumping rocks on the sea and just filling up and making a bridge. And if you look at Tyre today, it looks like a peninsula. But in those days, it was an island. Alexander the Great turned it into a peninsula. So yeah, he took over Tyre. And then he besieged another city. And they went all the way to like modern day border between Pakistan and India. He went a long way. When they got to India, and he was like, whoa, these dudes are fighting on elephants, and they're really advanced. And kind of part of Alexander the Great's campaign was to spread Greek religion and Greek civilization. They thought they were better than everybody else, and Greek gods and stuff. And they went to India, and like India already had like 100 billion gazillion gods. So they were like, okay, well, maybe we'll turn around. We don't want to like get lost, turn into a droplet of water in an ocean of gods out here. So yeah, nice meeting you, Indians. We're going to turn around. So they went back to Babylon. But on the way back to Babylon, he was besieging another city. I don't remember what city it was, but he was a badass, this dude Alexander. This is back in the days of where the king was also the lead fighter. And you were the lead fighter because you were the lead king and stuff. Even though he was born into it, he was a badass. And he, for example, in the battle against the Persians, he was fighting on the front lines, and he killed some dude, but then some dude like jumped on top of him and was about to chop his head off, and so then his buddy chopped the arm off of the dude right before he was about to chop Alexander's head off, and just like really intense battles. But on one of the sieges, Alexander was sieging some city, and they went up the ladders to climb up into the ladder, and he was the first dude up the ladder, and he jumped over the ladder into the wall. But after he jumped in, the ladder fell. So he was the only dude inside the city fighting off the barbarians, or whoever they were. And while he was fighting, somebody got a good arrow shot and got him in the lungs. And he fell down, and they didn't kill him, but his dudes grabbed him and brought him back to home base. And they pulled it out, and he survived, but it made him really sick. And they brought him back to Babylon. He never recovered, and he ended up dying just shy of his 33rd birthday. So dude was 32. I think he became king at like 20. I think for like 12 years he was raging hell. Raging. Yeah, so when he died, he didn't leave a successor. They were like, well, who's the successor to great Egyptian Greek kingdom? And he goes, to the strongest. And so by then the kingdom was very, very, very big. And And I think there was some infighting and stuff, but they ended up deciding that what they needed to do was divide it into 4 parts. The northern part went to Sukliad, and so that Sukliad dynasty kingdom lasted for like 200 years or something like that. It was Seleucus, followed by his son Antiomatrix, followed by Seleucus, followed by Antiomatrix. They only had 2 names for the whole kings throughout the kingdom. And then there was another empire. I don't know who the leader of him was, but it was the they called him the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. And that was in like modern day, like Kashmir area. And so Greek religion made it all the way into like modern day India. And so they put, Greek statues up there, Greek philosophy. Because Alexander, his tutor was the great Aristotle. We've all heard of Aristotle. He was like the greatest philosopher ever. Well, he was Alexander's tutor. And while he was a boy, prince of Macedon. And Alexander was like basically like the first scientist. I mean, not Alexander. Aristotle was like the first scientist. He did experiments. He took notes of the natural world. He came up with the idea of like how blood works and how the organs work. I don't think they were dissecting people those days though, so he was totally wrong. But he was like, and I'm not a Greek philosophy dude yet. So I don't really know what he said, but I think he was the one who said that that the earth is the center of the world, of the universe, and all of the stars go around us. I forgot to talk about some other thing that Plato said, because Aristotle was also, along the lineage of Plato. Plato lends his name to the Platonic solids. The Platonic solids are those shapes of equilateral angles and shapes around, right? Like the most simple is the tetrahedron, which is the 3-dimensional triangle, followed by like the dodecahedron, hectahedron, octahedron, and there's only like 6 of them that you can make. If you go beyond that, it's not completely symmetrical. And he came up with that. So Plato's idea was that that's what the world is made out of. Because he was kind of a student of those guys were students of Pythagoras, and they had the idea that everything in the universe was according to this ancient plan, eternally perfect design of the heavens, of the sky, so these Platonic solids existed and held the earth together, and that's what the sun was this perfect crystalline sphere. Then they got the idea of that from looking at crystals, and seeing and that the moon was this perfectly crystalline sphere going around the earth, and everybody went around the earth. And anyways, that kind of gave its way to the Christian religion of how God is perfect and God is all great and unchanging, and so don't try to figure everything out because it's all will of God or whatever. Anyways, that's what those days were about. So they were as good as they could have done with science, but they just weren't smart enough, I guess, at that point to figure it out, to actually open up the bodies and figure out exactly how stuff happened. But anyways, they did have teachings and stuff. So Alexander and those guys, they brought their teachings and brought the Greek civilization out there. I'm gonna have to continue.